Years ago, when I was writing all these comics, I always felt I was really wasting time. I felt, okay, so I'm making a living, we're selling comics, but there are people building bridges and people doing medical research and people doing things that matter. And I'm writing these stupid little fantasy stories. Maybe what I'm doing isn't really unimportant. Maybe entertainment is one of the most important things because there are so many bad things in the world that if you can entertain somebody for a while, it's a good thing. So I think I'm proudest of the fact that maybe some of the things I've done have entertained people.
The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a soulless cash grab that tramples all over the significance of the Peter Parker character and throws away all potential for a unique and compelling story due to studio intervention and forced setup for spin-off movies that ended up being cancelled anyway. The movie is a disaster. A complete disaster. You know this, I know this, everybody knows this, that's not really a hot take. For the past 6.5 years, people have been talking about how much of a failure this movie was. And for the past 3 years, all you guys have been begging for me to talk about it too. So here you go. I'm talking about it. Except the thing is, I don't really know what's left to say. This movie has been beaten, broken, dissected, and just absolutely massacred since its release, to the point where I'm not really sure what there is left for me to add to the conversation. But whatever, I'll try and give it a shot. To put it gently, this is a very not good movie that is interspliced with some very, very good moments here and there. So my goal for today is to try and rework this hot pile of garbage into something that can keep those really great elements while making the story and the plot as a whole actually watchable. Hopefully, I'm going to try and set your expectations kind of low here, but that's my goal. Alright, firstly, I'm not going to be continuing off my Amazing Spider-Man 1 rewrite. I had originally planned to, but after thinking about it, I realized that I don't change that much in that story, just little tweaks and stuff, and I feel like it'd be better to not have required viewing for another stupid Spider-Man video of mine. I'll be lucky if people watch this video all the way through. I don't want to push that luck. The structure of this movie is interesting. Some might call it bad, but I'm going to try and be nice and call it interesting. Basically, for a majority of it, it's a bunch of montage-like scenes that are interconnected by what I would call main story scenes. It's a method that, on paper, is actually a really good idea. So much of Spider-Man's stories are best told in a serialized way, like TV or comics, and in film, it's a lot harder to represent that. But the problem is that only about half of these sequences are actually any good, the other half being cringy music videos made for a focus group. And pretty much every single one of the main story scenes is terrible, just terrible. The plot as a whole is completely all over the place and overly complex, but I think if the story were simpler and didn't try so hard to force in stuff like Green Goblin or the Sinister Six, it could definitely work. But that's really the challenge when it comes to this rewrite. Trying to decide what story points should stay and be reworked and what should just be cut out altogether. My intent is always to keep as much as possible from the original and just rework things to make the movie into something I think would be better. But after looking through everything in this, I'm not really sure how possible that is. The skeleton of this movie is pretty much broken, so we're gonna have to cut out what feels like 60-75% of this movie and start basically from scratch, which is kind of funny really in a sad way, considering there's hours and hours of footage that was cut from this movie that we'll never ever see. So instead, we're going to keep the main premise of what this movie was supposed to be. Peter investigates his family as he reconnects with his old friend Harry Osborn, all the while Electro starts to become a threat. No Goblin, no Rhino, no magic spider blood, just keeping it very simple. We do this to focus in on a few specific themes and ideas as opposed to just throwing everything we have into the pot and hoping it works. The big theme that I want the story to focus on is the importance of Spider-Man. Why does this character matter? How does he impact people, and how can he, as well as the people telling his stories, use that position responsibly? So, with all that out of the way, and with that question in our heads, let's just get into it and start at the beginning. There are a lot of ways you can open a movie. Horror movies like to have a little scene that's about a different cast of characters and introduces the main monster or threat. A lot of superhero movies start with a scene introducing the villain and their origins, or some cool little narration to set the mood, or a fun little action set piece to hook the audience into being invested. Or you can do what this movie did and put a 7-minute long scene about Spider-Man's parents on a plane with a lazily shot fight about a B-plot that people didn't actually care about in the first place. So we're skipping that whole scene with Peter's parents on the plane. It's boring and pretty much pointless and a bad start to a Spider-Man movie, and it's stinks and I don't like it. Instead, we're going to open with the best part of this movie, that first real scene of Spider-Man. The opening scene to this movie is perfect. This movie as a whole is terrible, but that scene is the best Spider-Man has ever been in a movie, hands down. That might be a bit of an overstatement, but it's pretty close. That is the best swinging, the best action, the best soundtrack, and the best suit. Oh my god, the suit. Now let's talk about the suit. Can I talk about the suit? Please, I'm dying to talk about the suit all day. This suit is the best Spider-Man has ever looked on screen. I love the Raimi suit. That thing is my childhood, and I really like the designs of the MCU stuff, but oh my god, the Amazing Spider-Man 2 suit is the gold standard for how superheroes should be presented on screen. It's only a shame that the movie it's in is kind of trash. And on top of that, the CG model they use is incredible. The way the suit ruffles and folds with the model instead of just looking like a rubbery mannequin, the CGI still looks fantastic even 6 years later, and that is a testament to how well they designed this suit. So we do the scene pretty much the way we got it. Maybe Peter can work a little bit more on actively saving people instead of just making jokes. Also, let's tone it down with the overly goofy Paul Giamatti. If you want to make the movie as a whole goofy, go for it. You know I love that kind of thing, but tonally, he just didn't fit with the rest of the movie at all. During the scene is when we meet Max Dillon as he walks down the street carrying a bunch of blueprints. His blueprints fall into the street where Spider-Man saves him and talks to him. We're keeping him being a Spider-Man fanboy since that's my entire brand and it'd be sacrilegious to ignore it, but we're gonna go a step further than that. I want Spider-Man saying these things to Max, that he matters and that he's his eyes and ears, to really strike home with him. To Spider-Man, these words might just be fun banter, but to Max, it's more than that. That's the most anyone's ever noticed him or given him any respect, and that small interaction is one of the only things that gives him a sense of worth. Also, the performance could be a little bit more...
You're no Spider-Man. He's a Leo. You're a Sagittarius. You will Spectrum again. I'm gonna rip your well-groomed head off.
Understated. So Peter gets a call from Gwen as he's late for his graduation. We are not going to have Peter hallucinate Captain Stacy or anything like that. On paper, it's an interesting idea, but it was really quickly glossed over and not explored well enough, and so it only led to crappy CW-style relationship drama between Gwen and Peter. So instead, during that opening scene, we establish that Peter is actually doing pretty well, which is really out of character for him, I know. He has a great girlfriend, he's got a scholarship to his top pick college, he started selling his pictures to the Daily Bugle, and best of all, New York seems to really love Spider-Man. He's no longer the dark, vengeful vigilante that he was in the first movie. He's transitioned into a true and proper superhero. But we see in that opening scene, specifically with his interactions with Max, that Peter doesn't really understand his position yet. He doesn't notice just how much he helped someone like Max Dillon simply by talking to him and making him feel special. That's a lot of power for one person to have. Is Peter really being responsible with it? So Peter stops the Russian mob and shows up at his graduation just barely on time, only he's not gross about it. After the ceremony, Peter's talking with Aunt May about Ben and how proud he would be of him, and then he talks to Gwen a little bit, and we get some of that fantastic Andrew Garfield-Emma Stone chemistry. That's when he looks off into the sea of people and he spots a familiar face. Harry Osborn. Harry and Peter are childhood friends. He left for private school in Europe when they were freshmen and is now showing up out of the blue to surprise his best friend. I know a lot of people say that this is something that should have been established before, and while that would have been nice, I really don't think it's much of a problem if it's done naturally. So Harry and Peter talk a bit, and out of the crowd we hear a voice yelling, "Hey yo, Osborn's back!" And Flash Thompson charges toward Harry and wraps his arm around his head. Flash Thompson is one of the best Spider-Man supporting characters ever. And in the first movie, we had the best interpretation of the character, and it's a shame he was just abandoned. The high school bully of Peter, who's Spider-Man's biggest fan and ends up being one of Peter's closest friends and a superhero, is such an interesting character and interesting dynamic, and it needs to be properly explored in the movies. I think this movie should expand on the depth that we caught glimpses of in Flash's character from the first movie, and promote him from a minor character to nearly a full-on supporting role. So Harry takes Peter, Gwen, Flash, and maybe a few other cool kids to lunch, and they catch up and they have some fun little banter. Again, we're cutting out the forced drama between Peter and Gwen, and we're not having them break up at this moment. It was weird to end the last movie with them together and then basically start this movie with them breaking up, and on top of all the stupid drama that I mentioned before, it's just not worth it. We learned that Harry's moving to a new apartment for school, and he invited Peter to move in with him, entirely rent-free. Peter is shocked, completely speechless, before Gwen chimes in and says that he would love to. Harry laughs and he says the place isn't ready yet, but in a few weeks it'll all be sorted out and they can have a house party to celebrate their move-in. This is also where Peter's introduced to Harry's new girlfriend, Felicia Hardy. Felicia is a character that was so barely in the original movie, and they wasted Felicity Jones and all those deleted scenes for what was basically a cameo. A few years later, I watched The Theory of Everything, and the synopsis had The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in parentheses next to her name, and I can't tell if that's funny or sad. So in this, we're gonna make Felicia a much more prominent character. From there, we have one of those montage moments that I was talking about, and I think the one that was presented in the movie was really great. I really like the news commentators in the background. It might be cool if we established that one of them was J. Jonah Jameson or something. That might be fun. That scene we got of the kid is absolutely perfect. I love that scene more than anything. That is peak Spider-Man storytelling right there, despite how short it is. There's also that really great scene of Peter buying cold medicine as Spidey. That was a lot of fun, and with the structure, we can do a lot more scenes like that. Basically, we're going to be treating this movie and its structure similar to how I did my Clark, a Superman story video, with moments of important story beats surrounded by smaller moments that build character. In terms of changes for this sequence, we obviously cut out the creepy stalking, none of that, and we don't do any of the weird stuff about Peter's dad's suitcase, and now we get to properly meeting Max Dillon as he goes into work. We see him get pushed around, walked all over, and flat out ignored by the people around him, and it's extremely familiar. He's basically no different from Peter at the start of the last movie. He feels like the world hates him and he's just overlooked by everyone around him. Only Max wasn't bitten by a genetically enhanced spider, so he wasn't able to get out of that dark place in his life. Bullied and abused by the people around him, he desperately wants so hard to be noticed and cared about, but nobody in his life has been giving him that, except for Spider-Man. We see that after he saved his life, Max has become a huge Spider-Man fan. Not to a creepy stalker level, but just a genuine love and respect for what he does. That one interaction with Spider-Man is the only thing in Max's life that made him feel important and special, and he tries so hard to cling on to that feeling. The idea of Spider-Man has been the only thing keeping Max hopeful in his life. At the same time, Peter's also making his way into Oscorp to pick up Gwen or meet with Harry or something along those lines. Maybe at the front desk they won't let him in at first because he broke in the last movie. That might be fun. Peter and Max both get into the elevator together and they talk a bit, but not much, just some small talk and they introduce each other. Peter gets off the elevator where he has to wait outside the lab for a bit, and while he's waiting he sees a familiar face. Felicia Hardy, sneaking through one of the lab doors as the last person leaves. We see Felicia as she goes through a bunch of different file cabinets, muttering to herself as she's searching for something. That's when Spider-Man slowly rappels down from the ceiling and surprises her. Peter starts to question her, but he stops when he sees a folder in the cabinet labeled Parker. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he opens the folder to see a picture of his parents, followed by pages and pages of blacked out information. Felicia asks why the Parkers are so important to him, and he makes some excuse that they're old friends or something, not revealing his identity of course. We learn that Felicia is after information about her father. He was a notorious thief known as the Cat Burglar, and when she was young he had a job to steal something from Oscorp, only he disappeared, and she's been investigating Oscorp to find answers about what happened to him. She says they can both work together to uncover Oscorp's secrets, about both her father and Peter's parents, and Peter isn't sure what to say. As all this is happening, we see Max getting out of the elevator and making his way to the lab that he's interning at. He's working for Otto Octavius as his assistant. Max does everything as he's asked, but still Otto walks all over him. Not out of spite, but out of passion for his own work. And Max takes it personally. Without paying much attention to Max, Otto asks him to check on the filter for something called the tank. We can also keep the whole birthday thing to really hammer home how unimportant Max feels even on the day where he's supposed to feel special, except
It's my birthday. Now it's time for me to light my candles.
without that, Max walks into a room with a massive tank filled with electric eels and a sludge-like compound that enhances their electric potential, which Oscorp has been using to experiment with a new form of clean energy. Max unscrews some stuff to check on the filter and he sees that it needs to be replaced. He calls up to have a professional come down to replace it, but the person on the other end basically blows him off and tells him to do it himself. He carefully pulls out the filter and a massive charge of electricity surges through him and launches him back, slamming him through the glass and into the tank with the eels. Max screams as the sludge from the tank along with the eels and the already deadly power surge fill his lungs and his veins with electricity. His skin starts to crackle with energy, turning Max Dillon into a being of pure electricity, and Electro is born. So as I said before, I want to keep Electro as the villain. I normally don't think Electro is a villain that has the emotional depth and weight to carry his own movie, and apparently neither does Sony because they just use him as filler for most of the movie. But with that said, I'd like to challenge myself, and I think it would be interesting to take what is easily one of the worst parts of the original movie and try to make him an interesting and compelling foil to Spider-Man, both physically and emotionally. I'm obviously changing some of the details about his origins to prevent people from telling me all the illogical inconsistencies with how it happened, like why is the tank open and why are they using eels? That's so goofy in my movie based on a comic book about a man with spider powers. Boop ba doop ba doop, ding, give it a sin. Alarms start blaring and Max slowly stands up, covered head to toe in electricity. And in an act of fear and panic, he lashes out, causing massive destruction to all the other labs. Terrified, he looks all around him as he's able to see the electrical signatures of not just the power lines that run through the walls, but within people and other living things. Back to Peter and Felicia. Before Peter can make a decision about teaming up with her or not, Peter's spider sense triggers before a massive explosion shakes the building. He hears the alarm go off and he rushes off to help people in need. This scene is going to be all about Peter saving people from the wreckage, pulling them from fires and getting them out of the building. He's not sure who or what caused the damage, but his number one priority is getting people safe and making sure nobody ends up like his uncle. He gets everyone out safe, and before he knows it, Felicia is gone, leaving only a small card with her phone number next to a drawing of a cat. The security feed of the accident is damaged, and the only thing that's known is that a being made of pure electricity is responsible. Spider-Man figures he needs to find this Electro guy before anyone else gets hurt. Max scrambles away into an alleyway, away from all the wreckage and destruction that he's caused. Panicked, he looks down at his hand, still pulsing with energy. He starts hyperventilating, not knowing what to do or what's wrong with him. And that's when off in the distance, he sees Spider-Man, swinging away, having saved the day. A massive smile lights up on Max's face, and the electricity that was coursing through his blood starts to dwindle until he returns back to normal, only a slight scar to show that anything had even happened. We're gonna handle this character a little bit differently than the movie did. As opposed to being Electro permanently, Max will instead appear in his human form for the majority of his life. It's only in times of emotional stress and trauma that his body reacts outwardly and aggressively with the electricity. I don't want Electro to outwardly be a villain. Max Dillon never acts aggressively or maliciously to hurt others for the entirety of this movie. It might be a little bit different from his comic counterpart, where he's just a big ball of rage and anger issues, but I want this Electro to serve as a kind of metaphor for people struggling with their mental health and improperly coping with it. He's not a bad guy that needs to be beaten, he just needs help from someone who cares about him. So from here on out, the movie is basically nothing like the original. We're cutting out all the stuff with the spider blood and Harry being sick and Gwen going to Yale or whatever, all of it's gone. Instead, we're focusing on a smaller, more grounded and personal Spider-Man story. So we get another one of those montage scenes. They could show Peter trying to find Electro, maybe he spends his time with Gwen trying to track him down, and we also see him fighting more crime. Sort of similar to the opening to Spider-Man 4 that we were supposed to get. Rest in peace. It might also be funny to have a scene where a webbed up criminal is being questioned after Spider-Man leaves. So you thought you could just beat Spider-Man with a...
Come on, don't make me say it again.
I just need it for the report, sir.
With a big wheel.
We can also show more of Peter and Harry hanging out like friends, and it's in those scenes where we start to see subtle hints of the dark undertones to Harry's life, but nothing concrete. There's something more to him than he's letting on. And it's not all fun, happy, rich kid stuff. We also see scenes of Peter and Gwen where Peter makes certain promises to her saying that he would be there for her, only to have being Spider-Man get in the way of that. You know, the entirety of Peter Parker's character. During this, we see more of Max as he tries to go about his daily life and keep his new powers under control, trying not to cause any more damage to the people around him. He researches breathing exercises and meditation, and for now it seems like he's been doing a good job. He's able to return to work with nobody realizing that he was the cause of the damage. And he's able to have what seems like a normal, almost happy life again. In addition to all that, we see Peter contemplate calling the number that Felicia left him, knowing that the responsible thing to do would be to turn her in or tell someone about what she's been doing, or at least tell Harry, but his curiosity and his need to know about his parents is the only thing getting in the way of that. So Peter calls Felicia and agrees to work together to uncover what happened to their families. Peter shows up at Oscorp one night to meet with Felicia, and she arrives wearing a black jumpsuit, a mask, and a white wig. Peter questions the weird getup, and she says that if they're gonna work together, she needs to have a cool costume and a name too, and she wants to go by the name Black Cat. Basically, we see the importance of Spider-Man on Felicia's life, as he essentially inspired her to don the Black Cat mantle, and we can start to question if it was really responsible of Peter to do this. There's a little fun heist scene where Spider-Man and Black Cat break into an Oscorp facility. They need to break into Oscorp Tower's archives, but they don't have the access, so throughout Act 2, they work their way through different facilities to get the right codes. We also can have Peter doing a small amount of investigating out of costume. Nothing crazy like opening his dad's briefcase to find a subway token that takes him to a secret lair where we learn that Peter was in fact chosen to be bitten by the spider, a decision which spits in the face of everything that makes Spider-Man's origins special. Oh my god, I hate it. Moving on. We can also get something similar to that really fantastic scene with Aunt May about how she's hurt by Peter's obsession with his parents and how much she's been struggling after Ben's death. And maybe we can throw in about how she's even more scared that Peter's going to be moving out and leaving her alone. We get some more scenes of Peter fighting crime and trying to find this Electro guy, more stuff with Harry and Gwen, and then a few more scenes with Max trying to control his powers. Maybe in situations where he's emotionally distressed, we see glimpses of Electro start to break through, and he manages to keep it suppressed, but you can tell there's a lot of pent-up emotion that hasn't been properly dealt with, and that has potential to be dangerous. On the night of Harry's party, Peter gets a call from Black Cat. She tells him that they have to move in on Oscorp tonight to get to the archives, or else all their work will have been for nothing. That same day, Max goes into work, and near the end of the day, just as he's about to leave, he's pulled aside by Otto. Otto sighs, struggling to tell him the bad news. After the explosion and the damage that it caused to Oscorp Tower, the company has pulled away most of the funding from Octavius and his work, blaming him for what happened. Because of this, Otto is forced to let Max go. Max doesn't believe what he's hearing. He needs this job, and without it, he'll be thrown away onto the street. As Max goes to pack his stuff, the fear and the anger and the confusion causes electricity to surge through his veins once more. Only this time, he's not able to control it. He tries breathing, he tries distracting himself, he tries everything, but nothing works. He needs help. That's when he looks out the window and sees a familiar figure swing onto a nearby rooftop. Peter lands on the roof overlooking the Oscorp building, and he meets with Felicia. If Felicia's intel is right, they can use this access code to break into the classified archives and find out what happened to their parents once and for all. They break in, and we get another cool little heist moment of them sneaking in and avoiding lasers and all that. You know how that goes, like some fun Mission Impossible shit right there. They use the code and manage to get inside the archives. The room is floor to ceiling of file cabinets. Peter crawls up to find the file about his parents, and when he gets to it, he opens it up to find nothing. The folder's empty. That's when Felicia calls out to him and holds up a sealed envelope. It turns out she had broken into the archives during the Electro attack and gotten the file weeks ago. She lied about her father. Walter Hardy died in prison years ago. She was just using Spider-Man to help her break into the different Oscorp facilities so she can track down Oscorp's most prized project, more classified than anything in these archives. A super soldier serum called GR3314. Codenamed Goblin. Felicia plans on selling this formula to the highest bidder, and thanks to Spider-Man, she knows exactly where it is, right in Norman Osborn's office. If he wants to know what happened to his parents, he's gonna help her break in there and steal it. Peter, enraged, tries to fight Black Cat for the file, but she keeps on evading him and taunting him as he chases her all throughout Oscorp. That's when Peter stops, and he starts to think about what he's doing, what Spider-Man is doing. There are people in his life that care about him. His aunt, Gwen, Harry, but instead he's been ignoring them and wasting his time as Spider-Man to chase after the ghost of a man he never knew. He's being irresponsible. He takes a deep breath and turns away from Felicia without a word before perching himself on a nearby window. Felicia calls out to him, shocked. What are you doing? Don't you want to know what happened to your father? Peter stops. You think I wouldn't figure that out seriously? You don't do a good job of hiding it, Peter. Peter sighs before leaping out the window and swinging away. As Felicia curses out Peter's name, the camera slowly moves to the room next door, where we see Max Dillon, barely managing to control the electricity as he listens in on the entire conversation. Spider-Man's real name is Peter Parker, the guy Max met in the elevator all those weeks ago. He looks down at his arm to see the electricity coursing through his body before looking outside and focusing on Spider-Man's electrical signature. Max needs help, and Peter can help him. Spider-Man can help him. We cut to Harry's new apartment as Flash Thompson opens the door to see Peter. He calls out, "Hey, who invited Parker?" Gwen lets him in, pleasantly surprised that Peter was actually able to show up for once. Peter looks around at his future living area, and his mouth drops to the floor. The apartment is a massive, luxurious penthouse overlooking Times Square. It's unlike anything Peter's ever seen, and he can't believe he's about to live there. Peter asks where Harry is, and Gwen says that he's in the bathroom taking his meds. Before Peter's able to ask what meds, Harry steps out of the bathroom full of confidence and charisma, and he cuts off Peter by changing the subject. Later, he pulls Peter aside and asks if he's seen Felicia around. He's been trying to call her for days, and she hasn't been responding. Peter hesitates before lying and saying that he hasn't seen her. It's not worth the trouble and the pain right now. Harry takes the news that his girlfriend is ghosting him a little too well, almost as if he's forcing himself into this persona, and they move on to have their party. It's not some crazy Project X rager or something like that, but there's a solid couple dozen or so people there to celebrate Harry and Peter's new place, mostly Harry. That's when there's another knock on the door, and Harry, too occupied with some party stuff, I don't know, I don't go to parties, I'm a YouTuber. He calls out to Peter and asks him to get the door. Peter opens the door to see a gorgeous, red-haired woman standing before him. Mary Jane Watson grins at Peter, saying, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." Peter, completely shocked, doesn't understand her at first. The apartment. This place is gorgeous. You are Peter, right? Peter is just barely able to stutter out an introduction, and he lets MJ inside. She introduces herself to Gwen, and Gwen notices how Peter acts around this new mysterious girl. The party goes on a bit more when someone pounds on the door, and everything stops. Harry wasn't expecting anyone else. Who could that be? Flash goes to open the door, and we see Max Dillon standing out in the hallway. Out of breath and panting, he says, "I'm looking for Peter Parker." The crowd parts, and we see Peter, his spider sense going off like crazy. "Please, I need your help." Harry says, "Peter, do you know this guy?" Peter looks at Max, and he tries to place his face. He really does, but no matter how hard he tries, he's not able to. Peter shakes his head. Max's entire world crumbles. His hero, the one person in the entire world who cared about him and made him feel special, the only thing in his life that gave him hope. It was all a lie. Spider-Man doesn't care about him. Nobody does. And nobody's gonna help him when he needs it most. Max stumbles forward, begging Peter to remember him, as the electricity begins to course through his veins uncontrollably. That's when Peter realizes, Max, I'm so sorry. Max, I remember you. We met in the elevator, but it's too late. Lightning starts to crackle all around Max, causing Peter's spider sense to go off more than it ever has before. He places his hands behind his back and attaches his web shooters. Max, please don't do this. There are people here. I'm sorry. I can't control it. Before Peter can cry out for people to run, Electro explodes with lightning, sending a shockwave through the entire apartment and launching Peter and anyone else nearby to the ground. In the split second during the explosion, Peter pulls out his mask and slips it on. Smoke and dust fill the apartment as lightning shoots in every direction, causing walls and ceilings to collapse. Peter, blinded by the smoke, relies on his spider sense to web anyone nearby out of danger from falling rubble, but Electro's lightning is too unpredictable to do that for long. He needs to get him out of the apartment fast, but he doesn't know how to without hurting anybody. That's when there's a loud battle cry, and Flash Thompson, shielding his eyes from the smoke, charges at Electro, tackling him and sending them both crashing through the massive window. Peter yells out and darts forward, shooting out 2 webs to catch both Flash and Max. He's able to save Flash, but Max's electricity shoots up through Peter's web, frying his left web shooter and burning the web line. The line breaks and Max falls to the ground, leaving a crater in the middle of Times Square. Flash looks at the web line and back up to Peter, and then back at the web line, and then back up to Peter, and he pauses for a second. Holy shit, Osborn, I didn't know you invited Spider-Man to this party. Lightning begins to crackle from the crater in Times Square, with the electricity striking a nearby crowd of civilians. Peter jumps out of the apartment, where he falls out of frame behind a building before launching up wearing the full Spider-Man suit in all its beautiful, beautiful glory. Electro, still unable to control the lightning, begins to panic, and that only causes more electricity to shoot all around him. Here we get a set piece similar to what we got in kind of the end of Act 1 in the original movie, with Electro in Times Square, only again, Max is never intentionally attacking anyone. It's just his lack of control and his mental state that are putting people in danger. Peter is launched back by a bolt of lightning, which sends a police car toward a crowd of civilians. And we get that super cool slow motion moment of Peter using his broken web shooter and his spider sense to save everybody in the blink of an eye. As Peter saves these people, we hear whatever people are left nearby start to cheer, before focusing their attention on Electro, shouting obscenities, calling him a loser, insulting him, making him feel even more and more alone. This causes Max to break down, and the lightning around him starts to grow, creating a field of electricity that becomes more dangerous by the second. That's when Peter realizes what's happening. Despite his pleas, the crowd of people won't stop shouting at Max, unknowingly making things so much worse. Peter looks around before firing a web at a nearby streetlight and then connecting it to the ground. He does the same with every other streetlight and post around him, making walls of web that separate himself and Max from the world around them, completely sealing him and Max inside away from the civilians, both for their safety and for Max's. Now Max can't see or hear anybody else but Peter. The electric field starts to grow more and more dangerous, but Peter isn't afraid. The lightning might tear through his costume and burn his skin, but the last thing Peter feels right now is fear as he slowly approaches Max. Electro isn't a villain. He's not trying to hurt anyone. He just needs help. He needs someone to tell him that he matters and everything's going to be okay. Peter realizes now that Spider-Man is supposed to be that person. He has all of this power at his disposal. Not only his abilities, but a superpower more important than any other: hope. He has the power to inspire people and make them feel special, even in their darkest moments. And with great power, there must always come great responsibility. I don't know what it is you're going through, but I can only imagine how hard things must be for you right now. I just want you to know that everything is going to be okay. All those people out there, they don't know you, the real you. But I do. I've been in your position more than you might expect. You feel lost and alone and like there's nobody there to help you through moments like this. But you're not alone, Max. Peter places his hand on Max's shoulder and takes his mask off. I'm here. Spider-Man's here, and everything's gonna be okay. Tears start to roll down Max's face, vaporized by the electricity, and he wraps his arms around Spider-Man in a hug. I'm here as long as you need me. We cut to outside the cocoon as MJ, Gwen, Harry, and the others race down to join the confused and anxious crowd. There's a moment of silence before the cocoon tears and Spider-Man steps out, followed closely behind by Max Dillon. He braces for another barrage of insults and shame, but his face lights up when he's instead met by cheers and applause. Spider-Man holds his hand up high, and Max finally, for the first time in his life, feels truly worth something. We cut to weeks later, as we see Peter sitting at a table in a psychiatric hospital, and Max steps out to sit across from him. It had taken some convincing and a little bit of blackmailing on Harry's end, but Peter finally managed to be able to visit Max to check on him. He had to turn Max in for the damage that was caused, and Max went willingly, knowing that working on himself was the first step in keeping everyone around him safe, but was also the first step toward a better and healthier life. Max then checks on Peter and his life, and that's when Peter's face falls. We flash back to about a week earlier, as Peter shows up at Gwen's house. Tears roll down her face, and she's not sure how to tell Peter what she's about to tell him. All of the broken promises, the wasted nights, and the time spent with this black cat girl. Peter's let being Spider-Man define his entire life. The attack at Harry's party was the thing that made her realize how much he's been dragging her into that lifestyle, and how damaging it's been to her. Peter made a promise to her father that he wouldn't let Gwen be a part of this life, and he broke that promise. Countless times he broke that promise, and this time it almost cost Gwen her life, and she doesn't want to risk that again. So Peter has to stop being Spider-Man, or it's over for them. Gwen, you know I can't do that. I know. I'm sorry, Peter. We cut back to Peter and Max, and Peter looks up and he says, I'm fine. I'll be fine. As Peter and Max talk some more, we cut to shots of Peter swinging through New York once again. As if nothing had ever changed, only Peter has a newfound understanding of his position as Spider-Man. And then we cut to a shot of Black Cat as she sits on a rooftop. She holds a USB drive in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. She opens the envelope to read over the document one last time before pulling out a lighter and setting it ablaze. As it burns, we're only able to see a single line. Richard and Mary Parker have been assassinated by order of Norman Osborn. We cut back to Max. Hey, I'll tell you what you told me. Everything's gonna be okay. After all, you're the amazing Spider-Man. Oh, wait, shit, I forgot the credit scene. Oh, shit, we gotta set up our big Sony Spider-Man cinematic universe, and you can only do that through credit scenes, or so I've been told. We see Harry digging through the rubble of the apartment, sweaty and depraved, before his face lights up into a distorted grin as he pulls out a small metal box from the rubble. He takes the box and rushes it into the bathroom, before opening it to reveal a series of syringes filled with green fluid, marked GR3314. He injects one of the syringes into his arm, and a rush of relief and calmness washes over him. He closes his eyes and takes a deep, soothing breath, before opening them to see a grotesque, goblin-like monster staring back at him in the mirror. He jumps back, terrified, but the monster's gone as quickly as it appeared. He leans forward to look at his reflection before muttering, "What the fuck was that?" So as you can see, basically this entire video, all I was saying was just split this movie into two separate movies, with the second movie focusing on Electro and setting up the Osborns, and a third movie properly addressing what happened to Peter's parents and giving us an origin for the Green Goblin. I'm not going to go too in-depth with a pitch for that, but my idea is to basically have Harry be the main villain of the third movie, except he doesn't truly become the Goblin until towards the end. Instead, he serves to antagonize Peter and prevent him from getting the proper answers about why Norman Osborn killed his parents. We can also get that "isn't that the question of the day" scene that was in every single trailer for this movie that they ended up cutting out.
Oscorn, get you under surveillance. Why? Isn't that the question of the day?
Why did they cut that out? That's a whole storyline. What the fuck was this movie? What was going on there? It also might be cool to introduce J. Jonah Jameson for real this time, build out the relationship between Peter and MJ, have Peter try to repair his relationship with Gwen, and also show the creation of Doc Ock so he could lead the Sinister Six, since I guess that's something they wanted to do. Or they still want to do it? I don't know. Nobody knows anymore. This is all confusing. I would also want it to cover Gwen's death, in a similar way to what we got in the original Amazing Spider-Man 2. That scene is incredible, and it shows just how much potential this franchise of movies had to live up to their amazing titles. Andrew Garfield is such a talented actor, and he poured his heart and his soul into these movies despite the garbage he was given. And that resulted in the best possible way they could have adapted that iconic moment. So after Gwen's death, Peter would get all sad and retire for a bit, and the media could speculate that Spider-Man was killed in his fight with Green Goblin, before someone like Rhino or Shocker or some other small-time villain attacks. Spider-Man shows up to save the day just like we got at the end of this movie, only we cut to after the fight, where Spider-Man lands on a rooftop, and we hear a voice call out to him. Behind him, we see another figure wearing a Spider-Man costume. The other Spider-Man turns, terrified, like he's seen a ghost. "Oh my god, I'm so sorry, man, I thought you were dead." Peter says to this imposter, "Who are you?" Miles Morales takes off his mask and says, "It's a long story, man." Bada bing, bada boom, live action Miles Morales. Fourth movie's a team up with Miles and Peter as they fight Sinister Six. Maybe Miles can be the MCU counterpart for Spider-Man. It never happened, but man, could you imagine? That'd be so cool. So all in all, this movie is a complete and total disaster. I physically don't have the time to dive deep into every single level where this movie fails. To do that, I'd just be showing the entire movie, and that's what we in this little YouTube biz call illegal. So instead I chose to focus on the rewrite and really hammer home my ideas for how this movie could have gone, as opposed to filtering in a standard review like I normally do, since it's hard to mention why something's bad if it's part of that 80% of the movie that I'm just flat out ignoring. So instead, I'll just leave it at this. Superheroes are important. They're more than just stories you can use to escape the real world and have fun watching. This genre has potential to have actual weight and seriously change lives. The character of Spider-Man is important to me because he did exactly that. I struggle with my mental health a lot, and these stories about this character helped me realize that no matter what happens, no matter how hard I get hit, no matter how much I want to stay down, I keep on getting back up and I keep fighting. Because that's what Peter Parker does. That's what Miles Morales does. It's what Miguel O'Hara, Gwen Stacy, Mayday Parker, Ben Reilly, Jessica Drew, Peter Porker, William Braddock, Cindy Moon, and every other member of this massive, massive catalog of spider-themed heroes does. They all teach me that no matter what, I can keep moving forward and I can keep going on, and I don't have to compromise my morals, and I can stay responsible. And it's the responsibility of these storytellers to continue to inspire people, both kids and adults around the world, by making that message clear. So when a movie about this amazing, sensational, spectacular character is nothing more than a soulless cash grab made to force a cinematic universe and make money, that's when you know you fucked up, and that's when you need a rewrite.